The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber stretched 5 kilometers above the assembly floor, its translucent walls displaying the swirling nebulae of distant star systems. Captain Lee Hana stood at the center of the circular platform, her hands clasped behind her back, as thousands of alien representatives watched from their floating seats, arranged in concentric rings around her. The Valen refugee ship incident had started 3 days ago in the Kepler sector. The elongated vessel, carrying over 2,000 families fleeing the hegemony's latest purge, had been intercepted by hegemony battle cruisers demanding its return. When Captain Lee's destroyer arrived at the scene, she faced a choice that would change galactic history. "Return the vessel immediately," the hegemony commander had transmitted, his insectoid features twisted with authority. "These are fugitive criminals fleeing justice." Lee had looked at her tactical display, showing the refugee ship's life signs: children, elderly families huddled in cargo holds. She activated her comm system and replied with 2 words that would echo across the galaxy: negative, withdrawing. Her destroyer had escorted the refugee ship to the neutral zone while hegemony forces watched in stunned silence. No council species had ever directly defied the hegemony's territorial claims before. Now in the council chamber, the aftermath of that decision was playing out. The Thylorian speaker, a towering being whose crystalline body refracted light into dancing rainbows, gestured with 4 arms as he addressed the assembly. "Captain Lee Hana," his voice boomed through the universal translators, causing a harmonic resonance that made the air itself vibrate. "You have admitted to interfering with sovereign hegemony operations. Your actions have destabilized 3 sectors and threatened the peace accords that have prevented galactic war for over 3,000 years. Lee raised her chin defiantly. Those families were fleeing genocide, not justice. Since when does the Council consider protecting refugees a threat to peace? A ripple of uncomfortable shifting passed through the assembled delegates. The Aquarian representatives, their tentacles writhing anxiously in their water-filled spheres, exchanged worried glances. The bird-like Avani delegation ruffled their metallic feathers in agitation. Ambassador Park Minho watched from the human delegation box, his knuckles white as he gripped the rail. Beside him, Colonel Yu Sung-min whispered urgently into his comm device, coordinating with Earth's military leadership. The vote had been scheduled for weeks, but everyone knew the outcome was predetermined. "The Council has survived for millennia because we understand compromise," continued the Thylorian speaker. "We negotiate, we find middle ground, we do not make unilateral decisions that force others into conflict." "You mean you appease bullies?" Lee shot back, her voice carrying clearly across the vast chamber. "Every time the hegemony demands something, you give it to them. Every time they threaten war, you negotiate away someone else's freedom to buy peace." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species began shouting simultaneously, their voices creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. The hegemony delegation, a collection of various insectoid and reptilian species unified under their military doctrine, remained ominously silent in their black-armored seats. High above the assembly, the massive vote-counting crystal began to glow as delegates registered their decisions. Red light for expulsion, blue for retention, white for abstention. The crystal's surface rippled with colors as votes poured in from across the galaxy. Captain Lee watched the voting display with growing dread. The Aquarians voted red. They feared hegemony retaliation more than they valued human principles. The Avani delegation followed suit, their commercial interests outweighing moral concerns. One by one, species that had traded with humanity for centuries voted to expel them rather than risk the hegemony's wrath. Only the smallest species voted blue, the Kelvani, who had experienced hegemony oppression firsthand, and the Nomari, whose peaceful philosophy aligned with human ideals. A few micro-civilizations abstained, too weak to take sides in galactic politics. The final tally appeared in holographic numbers above the crystal: 847 red, 12 blue, 3 white. The Thylorian speaker's voice cut through the sudden silence. "The Galactic Council hereby expels the human species from membership. All trade agreements are dissolved immediately. Diplomatic immunity is revoked. Human colonies are declared outside Council protection. Security drones began descending from the chamber's upper levels, their sleek forms humming with energy fields. Designed to escort the human delegation from the premises, Ambassador Park stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You think you're protecting peace," he said, his words carrying to every corner of the chamber. "But you've just taught the galaxy that standing up to bullies gets you punished. You've chosen fear over justice." As the security drones surrounded the human delegation, Captain Lee turned to face the assembly one final time. "We saved 2,000 lives," she declared, "and we'd do it again." The human delegation walked out of the chamber with their heads held high, while behind them, the galaxy's leaders congratulated themselves on maintaining stability. None of them realized they had just created something far more dangerous than any military threat. They had given humanity nothing left to lose. The holographic displays in Earth's Emergency Coordination Center painted a picture of systematic strangulation. Dr. Kim Sora rubbed her tired eyes as she studied the latest reports streaming in from human settlements across the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the expulsion, and the Council's economic blockade was proving devastatingly effective. On her main screen, a three-dimensional map of known space rotated slowly, human colonies marked in pulsing red dots. One by one, those dots were dimming as supplies ran low and communication became sporadic. The Proxima Mining Collective had gone dark 3 days ago. The agricultural world of New Jeju was rationing food despite being a farming planet. Their seed shipments had been intercepted by Council enforcement vessels. "Another medical emergency on Titan Base," announced Lieutenant Han Kyung-ho from his communication station. "They're asking for surgical equipment. The accident in the fusion reactor injured 12 workers, but nobody will sell them replacement parts." Dr. Kim pulled up the tactical display showing the Titan system. 3 Council patrol ships maintained a perimeter around the moon, their sleek hulls bristling with sensor arrays designed to detect any approaching vessels. The message was clear. Humans were not welcome anywhere. Captain Choi Daeho's situation at Nexus Station perfectly illustrated their predicament. His cargo ship, the Seoul Dawn, hung motionless in the station's outer docking ring like a quarantined vessel. For 2 weeks, station authorities had refused his requests for docking clearance, despite his cargo holds containing medical supplies desperately needed by the Outer Rim colonies. From his captain's chair, Choi watched through the viewport, as familiar faces deliberately avoided him. The Aquarian merchant Tidewalker, who had shared meals with his crew just months ago, now swam past his docking tube without acknowledgement. The Avani trader Golden Feather actually changed direction when she spotted Choi approaching in the station corridors. "It's like we have some kind of disease," muttered engineer Park Soo-hyun as she watched a group of Thylorian businessmen physically move to the opposite side of the corridor when they saw her coming. 20 years I've been trading with these species, and now they act like I'm invisible." The isolation wasn't just economic. It was social and psychological. Human children on mixed-species worlds found themselves suddenly friendless as alien. Parents forbade contact. Research partnerships that had lasted decades were dissolved overnight. Even the neutral zones, traditionally safe havens for all species, began posting signs reading, "Humans not welcome." But in the depths of space, far from Council monitoring stations, something entirely different was happening. Communications Specialist. Jin Mirai sat in her cramped monitoring station on Europa, surrounded by banks of quantum receivers and encryption devices. Her job was to listen to the galaxy's chatter, to emergency broadcasts, to the whispered conversations that traveled between star systems. At first, the silence had been deafening. Human communication networks, once bustling with interstellar commerce and diplomatic traffic, had become ghost channels. But gradually, Jin began detecting something unusual. Encrypted signals were appearing on frequencies that had never carried traffic before. Short bursts of data, heavily coded, always from the same source regions. "Dr. Kim, you need to see this," Jin called out, her voice tight with excitement. She patched her station into the main display, showing a complex web of signal intercepts. "These transmissions are coming from Kelvani space." The Kelvani had been among the few species to vote against human expulsion, but their homeworld lay deep within hegemony territory. For generations, They had been treated as second-class citizens, their mountain mining colonies strip-mined to fuel hegemony war machines. Jin had never seen direct communication from their worlds before. "Can you decode it?" Dr. Kim asked, leaning over Jin's shoulder to study the signal patterns. "Already working on it," Jin replied, her fingers dancing across the quantum decryption matrix. "It's primitive encryption, but clever. They're using old human commercial codes from before the expulsion." The message that appeared on screen was brief, but revolutionary. "Hegemony forces withdrawn from Sector 7. Mining quotas suspended. We remember your captain's courage. The strong should protect the weak." Dr. Kim felt her heart race. The Kelvani weren't just sympathizing. They were actively resisting hegemony control, inspired by Captain Lee's defiance at the refugee ship incident. Over the following days, more encrypted messages appeared. The Nomari, peaceful traders who had been crushed under council taxation for decades, sent coordinates for secret meeting points in neutral space. The Zelani, amphibious beings whose water worlds had been polluted by industrial dumping, offered to share their bioremediation technology. "It's not random," Jin explained during the daily briefing. "These species have something in common. They've all been stepped on by the bigger powers. The council members who voted to expel us are the same ones who've been exploiting these smaller civilizations for centuries." Captain Lee's refusal to surrender the refugee ship had done more than anger the council. It had shown the galaxy's oppressed species that someone was willing to stand up to bullies. While the major powers celebrated humanity's isolation, the forgotten peoples of the galaxy were quietly reaching out. Jin intercepted another transmission, this one from a species she had never heard of before, the Vorthani, crystalline beings from the galactic rim. Their message was simple but profound. "The enemy of our enemy is our friend. We have resources. We have anger. We have been waiting for someone brave enough to fight." Dr. Kim stared at the growing web of secret communications spreading across her displays. The Council had intended to isolate humanity, to make them an example of what happened to species who disrupted the established order. Instead, they had inadvertently connected every oppressed civilization in the galaxy. "They're not just abandoning us," Jin reported, her voice filled with growing excitement. "The underdogs are watching to see what we do next, and I think they want to help us fight back." Engineer Bay Tajan stared at his sensor readings in disbelief, convinced his equipment was malfunctioning. The abandoned mining station designated as Outpost Kappa 7 should have been showing minimal life signs. Just his small team of human engineers working to convert it into a supply depot. Instead, his screens displayed dozens of ships, multiple species signatures and energy readings that suggested the station was operating at full capacity. He rushed to the observation deck, his magnetic boots clanking against the metal flooring of the rotating habitat ring. Through the reinforced viewport, what he saw defied everything he thought he knew about galactic politics. The station's docking bays, which had been empty rust buckets just weeks ago, now buzzed with activity that looked like organized chaos. A sleek Kelvani smuggling vessel was docked at Bay 3, its crystalline hull shimmering as spider-like cargo loaders moved rare earth elements from its holds. The minerals were worth a fortune, exactly the kind of resources human colonies desperately needed, but could no longer purchase through legal channels. At Bay 5, a Nomari research ship extended delicate sensor probes, its crew of aquatic beings, working in environmental suits to install what looked like advanced shielding generators. "How did they even find us?" Bay muttered, watching a group of insectoid Vorthani technicians scuttle across the station's outer hull, their 6 arms working in perfect synchronization to repair damaged solar collectors that the humans had written off as beyond salvage. The answer came when he entered the station's main common area. What had once been a sterile cafeteria for mining crews was now a bustling coordination center, filled with beings from a dozen different species. Holographic star charts floated above makeshift tables, while creatures who had never shared the same breathing atmosphere worked side by side, united by desperation and hope. Captain Yun Jihye stood at the center of it all, her modified corvette visible through the massive viewport behind her. The Busan fighter had been transformed from a simple patrol vessel into a mobile command center, its hull bristling with communication arrays cobbled together from salvaged parts. She was addressing a mixed group of representatives, her translator, device working overtime to convert her words into various alien languages. "The beauty of being outcasts," Yoon explained, gesturing toward the star charts showing blocked trade routes, "is that we're no longer bound by their bureaucracy. No permits required, no council oversight, no diplomatic protocols to follow." A Kelvani merchant named Stonecrusher, his rocky exterior scarred from years of dangerous mining work, chittered in agreement. "For 3 centuries, we asked council for protection from hegemony strip mining. 3 centuries of forms, committees, and delays, while our mountains were carved hollow." Beside him, a Nomari scientist called Deep Current undulated her tentacles expressively. Council taxation increased 300% over past decade. They claimed it was for galactic security, while our research stations crumbled from lack of funding. Bay watched in fascination as species that had never directly communicated before found common ground in their shared grievances. The Zilani delegate, her amphibious features glistening under the station's artificial lighting, described how council environmental regulations had been relaxed to benefit industrial corporations, leaving her water worlds polluted and dying. "We tried following proper channels," she said, her voice carrying the harmonics that her species used for emotional emphasis. "Filed reports, presented evidence, begged for intervention. Council response was always same. Matter requires further study." The transformation happening at the station wasn't random, it was systematic. Yoon had established what she called supply chains of necessity. Kelvani smugglers brought rare materials that human colonies needed for their technology. Nomari scientists shared shielding technology that could hide ships from council sensors. Vorthani engineers provided maintenance services that kept aging human equipment functional. In return, humans offered something the galaxy's oppressed species had never experienced: military protection without strings attached. Captain Lee's Corvette squadron had already intercepted 3 hegemony raids on Kelvani mining operations, asking nothing in return except continued cooperation. "Look at this," Engineer Park Jinsu said, showing Bay a modified cargo hauler in Bay 7. "Vorthani gave us quantum storage technology. We can fit 3 times normal cargo in same space. Nomari provided stealth coating that makes ships invisible to standard sensors. The vessel looked like nothing Bay had seen before. Human engineering principles combined with alien innovations to create something entirely new. Its hull incorporated Kelvani crystal resonance systems for enhanced communication, while Zilani biofilters recycled air and water with 99.8% efficiency. But the most remarkable innovation was happening in the station's command center. Dr. An Sungwoo, a former council diplomatic analyst, had created what he called the Shadow Protocol, a communication network that connected oppressed species across the galaxy without using official channels. Council monitors all standard. "Frequencies," he explained, pointing to a complex array of quantum transmitters. But these species developed their own networks over centuries of being ignored. Kelvani use crystal resonance through asteroid fields. Nomari communicate through ocean currents on water worlds. Vorthani tap into cosmic background radiation by connecting these disparate systems through human relay stations. The Shadow Network could coordinate activities across thousands of light-years without council detection. Rescue missions were planned in real time. Supply convoys were routed around patrol ships. Intelligence flowed freely between species that had been isolated from each other for generations. Captain Yoon addressed the growing assembly of representatives. "Council wanted to make us examples of what happens to troublemakers. Instead, they've given us something we never had before: complete freedom to help each other." A new arrival entered the common area, a representative of the thermal folk, energy beings who lived in the coronas of stars and had been harvested for power by industrial civilizations for millennia. Their translator crackled with electromagnetic interference as they spoke. "We bring gift of pure energy conversion, no more dependence on council fuel monopolies. Also, we bring news. 17 more species have voted to leave council jurisdiction. They want to join Shadow Network." The room erupted in excited chatter. as beings who had spent lifetimes being ignored, suddenly found themselves part of something larger than survival. They were building an alternative to the galaxy's power structure, one based on mutual aid instead of exploitation. Bay realized he was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, not just a rebel alliance, but a completely new model of galactic civilization. And it had all started because one human captain refused to abandon refugees to their fate. The emergency klaxons wailed across the bridge of the Seoul Victory as Admiral Song Hyejin watched 3 separate tactical displays showing the same horrifying scene. Hegemony dreadnoughts, their black hulls bristling with plasma cannons, were systematically bombarding civilian targets on Thylos Prime, New Aquaria, and the peaceful garden world of Serenity. The coordinated assault had begun exactly 12 hours ago, timed perfectly to catch the Council's bureaucratic response machine off guard. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Council Command," reported Communications Officer Lee Yuna, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're requesting our fleet status for potential diplomatic consultation." Song almost laughed at the absurdity. The Council still thought in terms of committees and negotiations, while 3 entire worlds burned. Through the main view screen, she could see the distant flashes of orbital bombardment, lighting up Thylos Prime's night side like deadly fireworks. Commander Ominwu studied the tactical readouts from his station beside the captain's chair. Hegemony brought their entire 3rd assault fleet, 47 capital ships, including 6 of their new Devastator-class dreadnoughts. Council forces in the sector are requesting immediate withdrawal to defensive positions. "Of course they are," Song muttered, pulling up the deployment map. Council doctrine hadn't evolved in centuries. When faced with superior force, retreat and negotiate. It had worked when dealing with civilized enemies who wanted territory or resources. But the hegemony wasn't interested in compromise anymore. "Admiral, we're receiving encrypted signals from shadow network assets throughout the sector," reported Lieutenant Park Yesio. "Kelvani stealth squadrons are in position. Nomari support ships have completed shield modifications. Vorthani Engineering Corps is standing by." The transformation of human military thinking had been as dramatic as everything else since the expulsion. Without Council regulations limiting their tactics, human commanders had embraced innovations that would have been impossible under the old system. The Shadow Network had provided technologies and perspectives that changed everything about space. Warfare. Song's fleet looked nothing like the orderly formations of Council navies. Her flagship commanded a force of 37 vessels, but half of them weren't even human. Kelvani stealth ships, their crystalline hulls refracting light and sensor beams, moved in patterns that made them nearly impossible to track. Nomari, support vessels designed like living organisms rather than mechanical constructs, could adapt their configurations in real time. "Signal from Council Command," Lee announced. "They're formally requesting we maintain defensive positions while they open diplomatic channels with hegemony leadership." "Tell them we're experiencing communication difficulties," Song replied dryly. "And signal all Shadow Network assets. Operation Silverwind is go." The plan that unfolded over the next 6 hours would be studied in military academies for generations. Instead of engaging the hegemony fleet directly, Song's forces did something no Council military had ever attempted. They ignored the enemy's main strength entirely. While hegemony dreadnoughts continued their orbital bombardment, convinced that Council forces would eventually arrive for a predictable fleet engagement, Shadow Network ships began striking targets the enemy had never thought to defend. Kelvani stealth vessels, moving like ghosts through asteroid fields, located and destroyed. Hegemony supply convoys 2 systems away. Nomari infiltration ships, their biohulls allowing them to mimic space debris, attached themselves to hegemony command stations and began jamming their communications. Lieutenant Nam. Jiwoo coordinated the most ambitious part of the operation from her station aboard the command ship Seoul Pride. While the galaxy's attention focused on the dramatic space battle, her task force was accomplishing something far more important: evacuating 6 million civilians from the 3 besieged worlds. Extraction Team 7, reporting successful evacuation of Thylos Prime orbital stations, Nam announced. 400,000 civilians safely aboard transport vessels. Four Thani engineering teams have rigged the stations with decoy transmitters to maintain the illusion of population. The genius of the operation lay in its use of shadow network capabilities that no traditional military possessed. Thermal folk. Energy beings had infiltrated hegemony power systems, causing cascading failures that looked like equipment malfunctions. Zilani bioengineers had introduced engineered viruses into enemy life support systems, forcing hegemony crews to spend critical resources on internal repairs. Commander O watched his tactical display with growing amazement. Admiral? Hegemony. Third Fleet is reporting critical supply shortages. Their rear echelons are completely cut off. Command and control networks are failing across 17 star systems. And their response? Song asked, though she already knew the answer. They're requesting immediate ceasefire and diplomatic negotiations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone aboard the human ships. The galaxy's greatest military power, faced with tactics they couldn't comprehend, was now begging for the same negotiations. They had scorned when attacking helpless civilians. But Song wasn't interested in repeating the Council's mistakes. Negative. Signal all hegemony forces. You have 6 hours to complete withdrawal from all 3 systems. Any ship remaining after that deadline will be considered a legitimate military target. The hegemony commanders, accustomed to dealing with Council forces who negotiated endlessly, made a fatal error. They assumed the humans were bluffing. 3 hours later, the Shadow Network demonstrated exactly how wrong that assumption was. 4 Thani mining ships, equipped with drilling equipment designed to crack asteroids, began systematically disabling hegemony dreadnoughts by boring precision holes in their reactor housings. Kelvani crystal resonance technology turned enemy communications, arrays into feedback loops that destroyed their own electronics. The final blow came when Lieutenant Colonel Seo Jihan's Special Operations Team, transported by Nomari bioships that could survive in the vacuum of space, infiltrated the hegemony flagship and captured Admiral Vorthak himself. The legendary hegemony commander, who had terrorized 3 sectors for decades, found himself a prisoner aboard a human corvette. "This is impossible," Vorthak snarled through his translator as he was escorted to the brig. "Council forces are predictable, manageable. You fight like people who have nothing left to lose," Song replied when the transmission was relayed to her. "And everything to protect." The retreat of the hegemony Third Fleet became a rout that echoed across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, a major power had been not just defeated, but humiliated by an enemy they had dismissed as irrelevant. The psychological impact was even greater than the military victory. Within hours, reports flooded in from across known space. Hegemony commanders were withdrawing from disputed territories without being asked. Pirates who had operated under hegemony protection were surrendering to local authorities. Species that had suffered under hegemony oppression for generations began declaring independence. Dr. Kim Sora, monitoring the situation from Earth's Emergency Coordination Center, couldn't hide her amazement. "They didn't just beat the hegemony fleet," she reported to the assembled leadership. "They've shattered the psychological foundation of every bully in the galaxy. For the first time in anyone's memory, being strong and aggressive isn't enough anymore." The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the exiled humans achieved what the Council's vast bureaucracy hadn't managed in 3 millennia of careful diplomacy. They had made the bullies afraid, and in doing so they had changed the fundamental rules by which galactic civilization operated. The crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber had never witnessed anything like the procession that entered through its ancient archways. Ambassador Park Minho walked with measured steps across the same platform where humanity had been condemned exactly 1 year ago, but this time the sound of his footsteps was joined by dozens of others. Behind him marched representatives of 47 different species, their varied forms creating a living testament to the galaxy's diversity. The Thylorian speaker, his crystalline body no longer radiating the confident rainbow patterns of a year past, watched nervously as the delegation filled the central platform. Where once stood a lone human ambassador pleading for understanding, now stood an entire alternative government structure that had grown powerful enough to challenge the Council's 3,000-year dominance. The chamber itself told the story of the Council's decline. Nearly half the floating seats that had once housed the galaxy's most powerful civilizations now sat empty, their former occupants having transferred their allegiance to the Free Species Alliance. The Aquarian delegation had departed 6 months ago after the Alliance successfully defended their mining colonies from hegemony raiders. The Avani merchant guilds had followed, drawn by trade opportunities that the restrictive council regulations had never allowed. "Honored Speaker," Park began, his voice carrying clearly across the vast space without the submissive tone that had marked his previous appearances. "We return not as supplicants seeking readmission, but as representatives of a new galactic order." Behind him, the Alliance delegation presented a sight that would have been impossible under the old system. Kelvani representatives stood beside their former hegemony oppressors, who had defected after the Third Fleet's defeat. Nomari scientists shared data with Vorthani engineers in real time, their different technological approaches creating innovations. Neither could achieve alone. Thermal folk energy beings flickered in containment suits, specially designed by Zelani bioengineers, their combined expertise solving power distribution problems that had plagued space habitats for centuries. Admiral Lihanna, now wearing the blue and silver uniform of the Alliance fleet, stepped forward to address the assembly. The same woman who had been condemned as a dangerous rogue 1 year ago now commanded the most effective military force the galaxy had ever seen. Her fleet, visible through the chamber's transparent dome as it maintained position around the Council station, represented a new philosophy of space warfare built on cooperation rather than domination. "When you expelled us," Lee said, her words cutting through the chamber's silence, "you told the galaxy that protecting the innocent was incompatible with civilized society. You chose to maintain peace through fear and compromise, allowing the strong to prey upon the weak as long as it didn't threaten your comfortable stability." The remaining council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The reptilian hegemony delegation, reduced to a handful of representatives from their once mighty empire, couldn't meet her gaze. Their military might had crumbled, not through conquest, but through defection, as their oppressed client species joined the Alliance in massive numbers. Dr. Cho Youngmi, the Alliance's chief science coordinator, activated a holographic display that filled the chamber's center. The image showed a three-dimensional map of known space, but instead of the traditional territorial boundaries that had defined galactic politics for millennia, it displayed something entirely different: resource flows, population movements, and collaborative projects spanning dozens of star systems. "This is what the galaxy looks like under Alliance principles," she explained, manipulating the display to show specific examples. The Kelvani mining operation, that was strip-mined for hegemony profit for 3 centuries, now operates as a cooperative venture, sharing resources with 17 different species. The Nomari research stations that were taxed into poverty now coordinate with facilities across 40 systems, advancing scientific knowledge at unprecedented rates. The transformation wasn't just philosophical, it was measurably effective. Alliance worlds showed economic growth rates that dwarfed Council territories. Scientific advances were occurring at 10 times the historical rate. Most importantly, refugee populations that had numbered in the billions under Council rule had dropped to virtually zero as oppressed species found protection and opportunity within Alliance space. Commander Seo Jin-Hwan, representing the Alliance's Refugee Integration Corps, provided statistics that stunned even the most hardened Council diplomats. "In the past 6 months, we have successfully relocated and integrated over 200 million beings who were fleeing oppression in Council space, not through refugee camps or temporary shelters, but through permanent resettlement programs that match skills with opportunities across Alliance worlds." The Thylorian speaker's voice wavered as he attempted to maintain Council authority. "The galaxy requires structure, hierarchy, proven systems of governance. Your alliance is built on idealism that cannot withstand the pressures of practical politics." Park's response came not in words but in action. He activated his personal communicator and spoke a single command: "Status report from all Alliance sectors." the chamber filled with voices as representatives from across the galaxy reported in real time. Mining operations in the Outer Rim announced record production levels achieved through cooperative labor practices. Scientific stations reported breakthrough discoveries made possible by unrestricted information sharing. Agricultural worlds detailed surplus food production being shared freely with developing colonies. Most impressive of all, military commanders reported something the galaxy had never experienced: total absence of armed conflicts within alliance. Space. Disputes were resolved through mediation councils that included representatives from all affected species. The military itself had evolved from a conquest force into a protection and disaster relief organization. "Your practical politics," Admiral Lee said, gesturing toward the nearly empty council chamber, "resulted in 3,000 years of stagnation. Our idealistic alliance has achieved more progress in 1 year than your system managed in centuries." If to emphasize her point, announcement signals began sounding throughout the chamber. The Mineral Guild Consortium was formally withdrawing from council membership to join the alliance. The research cooperative followed minutes later. One by one, the remaining pillars of council power announced their departure. The final blow came when the Thylorian speaker himself rose from his position. His crystalline form had dimmed to barely visible levels, the equivalent of a human hanging his head in defeat. "The Thylorian Commonwealth requests permission to open formal negotiations regarding alliance membership." The irony was complete. The same species that had announced humanity's expulsion was now begging to join the organization that expulsion had created. Park looked around the nearly empty chamber, then at the diverse group of beings standing behind him. Representatives of species that had been ignored, oppressed, or dismissed as irrelevant had become the galaxy's new leaders. The Forgotten had inherited the stars not through conquest, but through proving there was a better way to organize civilization. "The Alliance extends welcome to all species willing to embrace our founding principles," Park announced. "Protection of the innocent, cooperation over competition, justice over convenience, and the absolute commitment that the strong exist to protect the weak, not to exploit them." As the Alliance delegation prepared to leave, Admiral Lee took one last look at the chamber where humanity had been condemned. The same defiance that had sparked their expulsion now represented hope for billions of beings across the galaxy. They had not just survived their punishment, they had used it to create something better than what had existed before. The age of appeasing bullies was over. The galaxy would never be the same. The end.